in the shadows of trash. The night was cold and the wind carried dust and smoke through the broken streets of the human city. In one dirty alley behind a row of shops, an alien woman moved slowly near the garbage bins. Her skin was pale and covered in cuts. Her long silver hair was tangled and full of ash. Her arms held a small child who was so thin that his bones showed under his skin. The child made a soft sound from hunger, but did not cry loudly. He had cried too much in the last few days, and now his small voice was weak. Her name was Verilyn. She had once lived on a clean and beautiful planet full of glowing plants and soft winds. That world was gone now. The war had burned everything. Her people were scattered across space like dust in a storm. She had escaped with her son in a small pod and landed on Earth, far away from her enemies. But Earth was not kind. People feared her because she looked different. Some threw stones. Others just ignored her. And some even tried to take her child away. Tonight she was desperate. Her son had not eaten in 2 days. She searched through piles of trash for anything. A half-rotten fruit. An old bread piece. Something with enough weight to be called food. Her hands shook as she opened another bin. The smell was strong and sour, but she found something soft. It was a crushed sandwich wrapped in a dirty paper. She looked at it and her stomach turned, but she didn't care if it could keep her child alive. She would eat anything. Then she heard it. Footsteps. She turned fast. Her body covered the child like a shield. Her eyes searched the shadows. A beam of light hit her face and she froze. The flashlight came from a man, a human, tall. He wore a long coat and had rough hands. He looked surprised but not angry. His voice was not loud. It was calm. And slow. Are you hungry? Verilyn did not speak. Her throat was dry. She waited for the man to shout or call for guards, but he didn't. He stepped forward and held out a bottle of water. She did not move. He placed the bottle on the ground and stepped back. You can take it. I won't hurt you. The child peeked from her arms and looked at the bottle. His tiny tongue moved across his dry lips. Verilyn slowly bent down and picked up the bottle. She gave it to her son first. The boy drank fast like he had never tasted water before. The man watched in silence. Then he spoke again. My name is Jared. I live nearby. You both look like you need help. Come with me. Verilyn's heart beat faster. She didn't trust him. No one had ever offered help. She had learned that kindness often came with a price. But this time, her son looked up at her with tired eyes. His small hand touched her cheek. He was too weak to walk far. She had no choice. She followed the man through narrow streets until they reached a small house made of metal sheets and old wood. Inside, it was warm. The lights were soft. There was a smell of cooking oil and herbs. It was not much, but to Verilyn, it felt like a palace. Jared pointed to a chair and went into the kitchen. Verilyn sat slowly holding her son. The child leaned, his head on her shoulder, and closed his eyes. He had never slept in a warm place since they landed. Soon Jared returned with a plate. On it were eggs and soft bread. Steam rose from the food. Verilyn stared at it. She waited for him to speak again or ask something strange. But he just placed the plate in front of her and sat on the floor near the wall. Eat. It's safe. I cooked it myself. Verilyn broke the bread and gave it to her son. Then she tasted the egg. It was warm. It melted in her mouth. She almost cried, but she held the tears back. She didn't want to look weak. After the meal, the child fell asleep in her lap. Jared brought a blanket and placed it over them. Then, he said nothing more and began to fix something in the corner. Tools clicked softly in his hands. The silence between them was not heavy. It felt peaceful. Verilyn looked around the small room. There were machine parts, old books, a photo of a woman and a young boy on the wall. Maybe it was his family. Maybe they were gone now. She still didn't know why he helped her. Maybe he was different. Maybe he had lost someone too. Maybe kindness did still exist somewhere in the galaxy. For the first time in many days, Veraline closed her eyes without fear, and the child smiled in his sleep. The morning sun came slowly through the broken wooden window. Light touched Veraline's skin, warm and soft, but she did not open her eyes. She had not slept like this in many weeks. Her son was still curled up against her chest, his small body breathing quietly. The blanket over them was rough but clean. It smelled like old soap and metal. The sounds of something sizzling in oil made her eyes open. She sat up quickly, her instincts still sharp. Her hands moved protectively around her child. But then she remembered. This was not an alley. She was not near garbage. She was inside a house, inside a stranger's home. The man, Jared, stood in the small kitchen corner. He was frying something in a round black pan. A kettle of water steamed next to him. He looked over his shoulder when he saw her awake. "You're safe here." His voice was calm again. Like last night, Veraline nodded slowly. She sat still for a moment, unsure of what to say. She looked around the room again. The tools on the shelves, the small blinking machine in the corner, and a tiny old heater humming softly. There were wires hanging from the ceiling and old drawings taped to the wall. Strange ships and maps of places she didn't recognize. Jared turned back to the stove. His hands moved with care. Veraline smelled something sweet now. Sugar, maybe. Her child stirred in her arms, eyes blinking open. He rubbed his eyes and looked up at her, then at the man cooking across the room. The boy did not cry. He watched, curious and calm. Jared walked over with 2 plates. One he placed on the table. The second he offered to her with both hands. 2 small pancakes and a piece of fruit cut into little squares. Veraline blinked. She reached out slowly and took it. The plate was warm in her hands. "Thank you." Her voice was quiet and dry, but the words were clear. It was the first thing she had said to him. He smiled, just a little. "You're welcome." They ate in silence. The child chewed fast but smiled between bites. Jared sipped from a metal cup and leaned against the wall. He didn't ask questions yet. He just watched her like he was trying to understand something after the meal. Jared spoke. "Do you have a name?" She hesitated, then answered, "Veraline." "My son's name is Low and nice to meet you, Veraline. I'm Jared. Just Jared. No titles here." She looked at him for a long moment. There was something about his face. His eyes were tired like hers. His beard was messy, his hair uncombed. He didn't look like the men who hunted her or the ones who shouted in the streets. He looked like someone who had been alone for a long time. "Why did you help me?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, rubbed his thumb against a scar on his palm. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be left behind." Veraline said nothing, but her chest felt tight. Not from fear this time. From something else. He stood up and moved toward a metal drawer, pulled out a small medical kit. He walked back and crouched beside her. "Your arm is bleeding. Let me clean it." She pulled back slightly. His hand stopped in the air. He waited. Then she nodded once. Slowly, he unwrapped her forearm. Dirt and blood covered an old wound. She had covered it with cloth and string. He said nothing, just worked. Water, cotton, antiseptic. Her skin hissed under the touch, but she didn't flinch. Lowen watched with wide eyes, then gently touched her shoulder. "Mama, better." She smiled at her son for the first time in days. Jared looked up at her while bandaging the arm. "I don't have much, but you can stay here for a while, until you're stronger. And your son? He should not grow up in the trash." She felt a sharp pain in her chest. She nodded again. "Thank you." But something inside her still warned her to stay quiet. Not to trust too fast. Not to tell him everything. Because if he knew what was really inside her, he might change. He stood and walked toward the back door. "I need to go to the scrapyard. I fix old machines. That's how I earn food credits. You'll be safe here. There's food in the box, water in the tap, and the heater will stay on. Lock the door behind me." He looked back once more before stepping outside. As the door closed, Verilyn looked down at her son. He had already picked up a small toy from the shelf beside the wall. A metal figure with big eyes and a tiny sword. She sat back against the wall and held him in her lap. She had no plan yet. No ship, no allies, no safe planet to run to. But in this strange human's kitchen, there was warmth. And maybe hope. The wind outside howled through cracks in the walls. But inside the small house, all was quiet. Verilyn sat by the heater. Her son curled up beside her on a soft blanket Jared had left. She watched the shadows on the floor and listened to the quiet hum of machines. The warmth of the morning still lingered, but something inside her was uneasy. She looked at her hands. Thin, pale, still shaking slightly. She pressed her fingers to her wrist and felt the slow pulse under her skin. The rhythm was wrong. It wasn't how her heart used to beat. Ever since the day they escaped the lab, something had changed, something deep inside her body. Her son stirred in his sleep, then mumbled a word she didn't understand. A word from her home language, one he had never spoken before. Her eyes widened. That language was sealed, lost. It had been burned with her city, and yet it came from him. Verilyn touched her stomach where a faint glow sometimes rose beneath her skin when she was weak. It was not natural. It was something they had put inside her, something they called the core. She remembered the cold lab, the needles, the machines. She remembered the scientists, some human, some alien, arguing about power, weapons, survival. They had used her, turned her into a living source of energy, not just to feed cities, but to feed bombs, ships, war machines. And then they discovered she was pregnant. Her child had inherited it. That was the moment she decided to escape. A sharp sound made her jump. A soft mechanical whine from the other side of the room. One of Jared's machines was active. A scanner, shaped like a small orb, hovered near a table. Its blinking eye turned toward her for a second before powering down. She stood slowly and walked over to it. The device was harmless, but it had scanned her. She was sure of it. Why would he leave something like that running? She checked the window, still locked. The door, too. Everything looked normal. But now her heart raced. Jared returned just before sunset. He smelled like smoke and rust. His coat was dusted with ash. He wiped his hands and gave her a small package, bread and dried fruit. Verilyn thanked him, but her eyes studied his face carefully. He looked tired, but not dangerous. He smiled at her son, who ran to him and hugged his leg without fear. "You're healing faster than I expected," Jared said while looking at her wrapped arm. Verilyn paused. "You scanned me." His hand froze in midair. He looked at her, surprised, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I did. Why I needed to know if you were injured beyond what I could treat. That's all. I didn't touch you. The scanner works by distance." Verilyn's voice grew colder. "And what did you find?" Jared sighed and leaned back in the chair. "You're not normal. Not just alien. Something else. Your cells. They glow. Like they carry power. And your child. He carries a piece of it too." She stepped back, her arms around Lowen. "You said we were safe. And you are. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't sell your location. I didn't call the guards. I just needed to know what I was dealing with." She looked at him for a long moment. Her fingers curled tightly around her son. She wanted to run. But there was nowhere left to run. Not anymore. Jared's voice softened. I've seen a lot of things in this galaxy. Machines that walk, ships that breathe, but I've never seen anything like you. Whatever they did to you, it's not your fault. And it doesn't make you a threat. Then why help me? He looked into her eyes. Because no one helped me when I needed it. He stood and picked up a broken drone from the floor. Tools clicked in his hands as he worked. His voice continued, low and tired. I was part of the last line. A human squad. We fought in the border war. One mission went bad. My ship crashed. My team left me behind. I fixed a radio with scrap and called for help every night. No one came. I almost starved until one old alien woman gave me a coat and a piece of bread. She said nothing. She just walked away. Verilyn listened in silence. That moment saved my life. And now, maybe it's my turn to do the same. She sat down slowly. Her heart beat fast, but not with fear. Something was shifting. She didn't fully trust him, but maybe she didn't need to fear him either. That night, as Lowen slept, Verilyn watched the stars through a crack in the ceiling. The stars had always looked like prison bars, but now, they looked like a path that maybe, just maybe, this human could walk with her. The wind had died down, and the city was quiet under a blanket of night. Jared had gone to sleep on the couch, tools still scattered near his hands. Lowen slept peacefully beside Verilyn, his small body warm against hers. For a short moment, it almost felt like a real home. The kind of home she thought she'd never have again. But peace never stayed for long. At exactly midnight, there was a knock at the door. Not a soft knock. It was slow, hard, and deliberate. Verilyn sat up instantly, her senses sharpened. Lowen stirred beside her but did not wake. She pulled him close and looked at the front door. Jared opened one eye on the couch, half asleep, but the sound made him jump upright. He glanced at Verilyn, then moved toward the door. Before he could say anything, another knock came. Then a voice. Deep, cold, and strange. I know what you're hiding. Open the door. Jared froze. Verilyn felt her heart pound. That voice was not human. Not fully. There was a metallic echo inside the words, like they were spoken through layers of technology and hate. Jared leaned close to her hide. Take him. Under the floor, she nodded and quickly lifted Lowen. Jared pulled aside a rug near the far wall and opened a trapdoor built into the floorboards. Wires, old batteries, and dust filled the small space. She climbed down with her son just as Jared slid the trap shut and pulled the rug back over it. From below, Verilyn heard the front door open. Footsteps entered. Heavy ones. She held her son close, covering his mouth gently to keep him quiet. Her own breath slowed, trained from years of running above her. The voice spoke again. I tracked energy readings here. Something old, something stolen, Jared replied calmly, trying to sound innocent. You think I'm running a reactor in a scrap shack? All I've got are busted drones and half a coffee machine. You scanned something. Something alive. Not human. You mean like a rat? Plenty of those around. There was silence. Verilyn could imagine the stranger's face, cold and sharp. She could feel the tension in Jared's voice as he tried to stand his ground. I smell her. The voice grew lower. You may be clever, human, but you've stepped into something bigger than you. What I do in my home is my business. Jared replied. You have one cycle to tell me where she is. Then others will come, and they won't be as polite. Then the footsteps moved toward the door again. Verilyn heard the slow creak of it closing. Then, silence. Minutes passed. Then the rug lifted again. It's okay, Jared whispered. He's gone. She climbed out slowly, holding her son close. Lowen blinked sleepily, confused by the fear in the air. Verilyn looked at Jared. His face was pale. His jaw was tight. Who was that? They call him Red Eye. A tracker, part synthetic. Works for those who hunt powered beings like you. He's not local. That means someone's paying a lot to find you. Verilyn sat on the edge of the couch, her arms around her son. He said others would come. Jared nodded, and they will. He marked this location. Next time they'll bring heat sensors. Maybe a drone swarm Verilyn's. Voice was low and shaking. I can't keep running. Not with Lowen. I'm tired. Jared didn't answer for a while. Then he stood and started packing a bag. Food, wires, tools, data chips. Then don't run alone. Let's get you out of this city. I know back roads. I used to smuggle refugees during the early wars. There's an old launch pad in the cliffs outside the zone. If we can reach it, I know someone who can fly you off-world. Maybe even hide you somewhere safe. Verilyn looked at him, eyes full of doubt and something else. Why would you do all this for us? He paused, then said, because maybe you were never meant to fall into trash. Maybe you were meant to rise from it. The rest of the night was spent in quiet movement. Jared disabled his machines, burned old files, and deleted any data that could be used to track each or her. Verilyn wrapped Lowen in soft cloth and whispered a lullaby from her homeworld as the sun rose. They stepped out of the safe house for the last time. In the corner of the street, far above, a small black drone hovered silently, its red eye glowing faintly in the mist, and somewhere far away, someone smiled coldly. The hunt had begun. The city faded behind them as Jared, Verilyn, and little Lowen moved through the ruins of the outer zone. Smoke drifted in the distance. Walls of old buildings leaned like tired giants ready to fall. The air was dusty and thin, filled with the scent of metal and fire. Every few steps, Verilyn would glance behind her, holding Lowen tighter each time. Jared led them through the forgotten places, old service tunnels, destroyed train lines, and rusted pipes that no one cared to guard. He moved like someone who knew where danger lived. Verilyn watched him closely. He had no weapons, but something about him felt strong. Not in muscles, but in will. The kind of strength that kept people going when everything else had already broken. Lowen clung to her chest, sleepy and quiet. The boy hadn't spoken since the night of the knock. Verilyn feared he had felt too much fear, too much silence. But she also knew he understood more than a child should. His eyes had changed, and she didn't like what she saw in them. They stopped in an underground tunnel to rest. Jared handed Verilyn a water pack and a small snack square. You need energy. You're running hot. Verilyn raised her eyebrow. Running hot. Your skin's been glowing since we left. You didn't notice. She looked down at her hands. Faint blue veins lit beneath the surface. Not visible before, but now glowing like soft fire. She tried to calm her breathing, to suppress it. But the light remained. I haven't used the core in weeks, she whispered. It shouldn't be this active. Jared knelt beside her. Then something's pushing it. Maybe fear, maybe stress, or maybe... He stopped. His eyes moved to Lowen. The child had opened his eyes, but they were no longer soft. They glowed faintly. A mix of gold and blue shimmered inside them. He looked aware, more than just awake. Verilyn felt her heart drop. She had always feared this. He inherited too much. Jared watched silently. The moment passed. Lowen blinked, yawned, and snuggled closer to his mother's chest. The glow faded. But something had changed. Verilyn knew it. We can't let them take him, she said, her voice shaking. Not again. Not like before. Jared placed a hand on her shoulder. They won't. I swear it. They moved again. This time faster. Jared used back routes through the scrublands. The old spaceport was just 2 hours away now. But as they neared the ridge, They saw them. Scout drones hovering in a search pattern. They dropped behind an old wall. Jared cursed under his breath. They're sweeping the zone. We need to break the line, or we won't make it. Once the sun sets, they'll launch. Hound's Verilyn closed her eyes. She felt the core burning inside her now, pushing against her skin like it wanted to be released. But she had always held it back. If she used it, they would find her faster. The signal would scream into the sky, but they had no time left. She stood up. You need a distraction. No, Jared said quickly. They'll lock onto you. They already are. It's just a matter of time. Jared looked torn, but then he pulled out a small device, a signal scrambler. He handed it to her. You've got 5 minutes. Then run north to the hill. There's an old freight pod, covered in vines. I left it powered. It still flies. Barely. She took the scrambler and nodded. Then, without another word, she stepped onto the road and raised her hand. The air-changed light began to swirl around her fingers. Her skin shimmered like glass under moonlight. Energy gathered in her palms, glowing brighter than any torch. She lifted her arm higher, and the drones saw her. They swarmed toward her like insects. Jared grabbed Lowen and ran the other way. He didn't look back. Verilyn stepped forward and slammed her hands into the ground. A wave of blue fire exploded from her body, sweeping across the road like a rolling tide. The drones burst in the air, their metal parts falling like rain soldiers watching from the cliff. Panicked, one of them shouted into his comms, "It's her, the core carrier. She's active." Repeat, "Target is active." More machines launched into the sky. Verilyn ran. Her body lit the ground with every step. The air burned around her, but she kept control, just enough to survive, not enough to kill herself. She turned sharply, ducking under a broken pipeline, and vanished into the brush. Jared reached the pod just in time. He placed Lowen inside and fired up the engine. The old machine coughed and shook, but it responded. He looked out the cracked window. Verilyn was coming. Her body glowing like a comet, feet kicking up sparks. Behind her, red lights chased her. 3 aerial hunters, armed and fast. She leapt over the last hill and dove into the pod. Jared slammed the hatch shut. The engine roared. The pod lifted into the sky just as a blast hit the ground below them. Inside, Verilyn collapsed. Her hands still burned, but her son was safe for now. The pod shot upward, rattling as its old thrusters strained against gravity. The ship groaned like a dying beast, warning them with every jolt that it had not flown in years. But it flew, and that was all that mattered. Jared gripped the controls tightly, sweat running down his brow. The sky outside flashed with distant light from the pursuit drones still trying to lock onto their signal. Inside the cockpit, warning lights blinked red. He slammed the console with his fist, and the ship finally burst through the clouds into the upper atmosphere. In the back, Verilyn lay on the floor, her breathing shallow. Her body still glowed faintly, soft trails of light moving under her skin like slow fire. Lowen knelt beside her, his small hands resting on her shoulder. He didn't cry. He just watched her with those wide, glowing eyes that were no longer afraid. Jared turned on autopilot and rushed to them. He checked Verilyn's pulse. It was strong, but fast. Her skin was warm. Too warm, you pushed too hard. He whispered, brushing her hair back. Her eyes opened slowly. They're still chasing us. He nodded a few left. But they won't follow beyond orbit. They don't have the clearance. She gave a faint smile. Good Lowen reached for her hand and squeezed it. Her fingers curled back around his, weak but present. She whispered something in her native tongue. Jared didn't understand it, but the words sounded like peace. The pod broke through the atmosphere. Weightlessness hit them as the ship floated into the dark calm of space. The stars appeared, cold and beautiful, endless in every direction. Verilyn tilted her head slightly to look out the window. So many stars. I never thought I'd see them again. Jared sat back and let out a breath. We're not safe yet, but we're out of the worst part. I sent a signal to an old friend. She runs a supply station near the rings of Ganira. She helps refugees. Will they take us if I ask? She owes me. Plus, she likes kids. Verilyn smiled again. Wider this time. Lowen likes her already. The boy giggled softly, still holding her hand. Jared checked the ship's systems. One engine was overheating. The oxygen was dropping, but not dangerously. They had maybe 10 hours of flight time left, enough to reach Ganira, if nothing broke. As they drifted silently through space, Verilyn sat up with effort. Jared brought her water and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. I need to tell you something, she said. You should know, he nodded. Listening, they didn't just put energy inside me. They designed it to grow, to evolve. They wanted me to become a generator, a living source of power that would never burn out. And Lowen, he was born inside that system. The power sees him as part of itself. But he's more than that. He adapts to emotion, to thought. I think he learns not just with his mind, but with his heart. Jared looked at the boy. Lowen was drawing in the condensation on the window, shapes of stars and animals from stories he had never been told. He's special, Jared said. He's dangerous too, Verilyn replied. If they catch him, they'll rip him apart. And they'll build weapons with what's left. They'll start wars with pieces of him. Then we'll make sure they never touch him. She looked at Jared carefully. You're not like other humans, he shrugged. I'm just a guy who knows how it feels to be forgotten. She leaned her head against his shoulder. The hum of the ship vibrated softly around them. Lowen crawled into their arms and yawned. All three of them sat like that for a while, saying nothing. Floating through the dark later, a light blinked on the console incoming transmission. Jared walked over and opened the line. A female voice filled the cabin, calm, strong, and surprised. Well, thought you were dead. Jared, not yet. I've got a passenger. Two, actually. One small. The other glows. Long pause. Then the voice spoke again. You're bringing trouble. I'm bringing a mother and child who've suffered enough. That's what I'm bringing. Another pause. Then the voice sighed. Coordinates sent. Don't be late. Jared looked back at Verilyn. We have a place. Somewhere to rest. She nodded, her eyes closing again. When the ship finally reached the ringed planet of Ganira, the station lights blinked in the distance. Like a second sunrise, the pod landed gently inside a hidden bay covered in vines and rock. They stepped out into clean air. Real light. A safe place. Verilyn looked around with wonder. Lowen ran forward, chasing shadows and laughing. Jared stood beside her, watching the boy with a tired smile. So what now? He asked. Now, she said, we live quietly, far from war, far from labs and soldiers, and if they ever come again. She looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly. Then they'll learn what happens when a mother protects her child. The end.